Welcome to Swords to Podcasts. I'm alone. I don't know what to say to you guys, but I'm just gonna turn the camera on, start recording, and see what the heck happens. So welcome to the Swords to Podcast, episode 6. Thomas is a little bit under the weather right now, and in an effort to make sure that he's A-okay for MagicCon next weekend, I will be recording this episode by myself. So this is going to be the episode where I talk about the deck that I have thrown together for Appa, Steadfast Guardian, from one of the new cards coming out in the Avatar The Last Airbender set. So I'm just gonna start talking. So this is the first time ever streaming from my browser, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So hopefully this shows up for you guys on YouTube and on the video version of Spotify. But I'm just going to start by going through some of the categories that we have, and I'll start, I guess, just by talking about the commander himself. So this is Appa. He is a 3/4 legendary Bison ally for 2 colorless and 2 white. He has flash flying, and when he enters, he can airbend any number of other target non-land permanents I control, which means exile them, and then when each one is exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 generic mana rather than its mana cost. He also reads, whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. So essentially what this does is this is sort of a delayed version of a Felidar Guardian, which is a very famous blink combo card in the command zone, which is really cool. So when he enters, you get to airbend a creature or any non-land permanent you control, and then cast it later for 2 mana. So you can get all kinds of extra abilities or extra hits off of your enter the battlefield effects and your cast triggers, and which is notable. So we have plenty of blink commanders already out there. You know, Thomas has one that he has built in paper, but the one thing that makes Appa different from all of those is I believe this is the first one that really takes advantage of being able to get cast triggers from your cards. So this opens the door to get over and over again triggers on these abilities that are more than enter the battlefield abilities. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is how this deck wins the game, which is very simple interaction. So this category right here is our combo pieces. So these consist of cards that when they enter, they essentially flicker another creature on our board. So all these cards effectively do the same thing. Felidar Guardian is the most notable one. So it is 3 generic and a white for a 1/4 cat beast. And when Felidar Guardian enters the battlefield, you may exile another target permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this allows you to flicker Appa or really any of our non-land permanents. So what will happen is you start the loop by either casting Appa or Felidar Guardian with the other one on the table. So Felidar will essentially, if you start with Felidar Guardian, it will flicker Appa. Then you can recast the Felidar Guardian. When you cast the Felidar Guardian, it enters, then flickers Appa, airbending the Felidar Guardian, and you just rinse and repeat. So obviously, that's a great combo, but it doesn't go infinite. How does it go infinite? Well, all of these mana reducers. So we have things like Cloud Key, Defiler of Faith, Helm of Awakening, Oketra's Monument, Pearl Medallion, Planar Gate, Semblance Envil, and the Wind Crystal. So all of these mana reducers are by and large different in their own ways. One of them that I will attract your attention to is Planar Gate. This is a lesser known card that is rather expensive for what it does. It is 6 colorless for an artifact that basically says pay 2 mana less when you cast a creature spell. So this essentially does the same thing as a Semblance Anvil does without forcing you to exile a card and imprint something with it. So if you can land some of these reducers and reduce your cost by 2 less, then suddenly this combo with your Felidar Guardian and Appa, you don't have to pay any mana to cast the Felidar Guardian from exile when it's airbended. So then you have 2 creatures that are infinitely entering and exiling and flickering each other. And so the best part is once you have that infinite loop happening, oftentimes you have to have another payoff or something to actually win the game with that. And with Appa, it's exceptionally easy because Appa, his ability allows you to airbend any other of target non-land permanents you control. So that ability is great because it works well with all of the other generic value creatures that we have filling the deck out. So any creature that when it enters draws you a card, if you have that mana reduction, every time you go through this loop, you can also cast that draw creature or whatever value creature you have. And then because you have that mana reduction, you can cast it for 0. So this loop then becomes beneficial to you. You can draw your deck, or you can deal damage to your opponent. You can do whatever is on these value creatures. So that is the main combo that this deck is going to use to win the game. So these 4 are those combo pieces. The only one that's different from these is Aang, Airbending Master. Number 1, I think would be totally wrong to not have him in this deck thematically. But he also just works very well with Appa, because if you have a cost reducer, he effectively does the same thing as Feldar Guardian. But instead of exiling and returning, this is airbending, so just like Appa. But if you have the cost reducers, exiles it, you can cast it later for free if you have those reducers. So this next category is Delayed Blink. So these are cheaper creatures that allow you to essentially flicker Appa later on a body. So these are all less than 3 mana, which is nice. So all of the other combo pieces that flicker it immediately cost more, but these ones are cheaper, and they're not as good, obviously, because they bring back Appa on end step. So these are value creatures. These do not go infinite with Appa because they only bring him back on your end step. We've got Charming Prince, Flicker Wisp, and Guardian of Girapur on this list. Most notably, Charming Prince is very efficiently costed, 2 mana for this. And there's also more things, so you can scry 2 infinitely if you have this combo going on. This next category is called Discount Double Check, and these are creatures that are essentially heftily costed for what they do, but each of these creatures, when they enter, draw you a card, but these spells are reduced on their own. So for example, this is Salt Road Pack Beast, 5 colorless and a 5 generic and a white for a 4/3 beast. And this creature reads, this spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each creature you control. When this creature enters, draw a card. So this effectively allows you to, anytime you flicker your board or airbend your board with Appa, as long as you have at least 2 other creatures, this Salt Road Pack Beast costs 0 mana, because Appa lets you cast it for 2 from exile, and Salt Road Pack Beasts will cost 2 less. The same thing is true with Search Party Captain, but it's a little bit harder to do. It costs 1 colorless less to cast for each creature you've attacked with this turn, and then whenever it enters, draw a card. Search Party Captain will probably be one of the first cards, or one of the next cards to cut, if I have some swaps to put in, but I do like these ones because they reduce costs all on their own. And then our next category is Enter Draw Man. So these are efficiently costed creatures and permanents that allow you to draw cards when they enter, typically. The first one is Arkham's Astrolabe, or Astrolabe. I'm not sure how you say that. Someone let me know in the comments. I think it's Labe. It costs 1 snow mana. It is a 1 mana snow artifact. And when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then you can use it to pay 1, tap it, and add 1 mana of any color. So it's a mana filter. But we don't care about that. All we care about is it costs 1 mana, and when it enters, draw a card. Now with Appa, he lets you airbend non-land permanents, not just creatures. So this is, while it isn't a creature, this can come down turn 1, it cantrips for you, and then later you can just cast it for value, and then obviously it goes infinite and lets you draw the deck with the infinite combo. A lot of these are just 2 mana creatures and artifacts that do that. We also have Recruiter of the Guard in here. This allows us to find any of those and find our smaller value pieces. This is 2 generic and a white for a 1/1 human soldier. And when Recruiter of the Guard enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with toughness 2 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Typically, you'll be finding other small draw creatures, but it is nice to be able to get a 2-for-1. And then if you flicker this Recruiter of the Guard later, you can keep getting more pieces and not just drawing cards you can tutor. This is Skull Clamp. I'm sure a bunch of you know what Skull Clamp is, but it's a 1 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/-1, and whenever the equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. If you're not already familiar with Skull Clamp, it's a very popular card in token archetypes, because you can essentially pay 1 to equip it to a small 1/1 creature, and because it gives it -1 on its toughness, the creature will immediately die due to state-based actions, and then whenever it dies, you draw 2 cards. So Skull Clamp is a 1 mana draw engine that lets you pay 1 mana repeatably at sorcery speed to draw 2 cards. And you might have missed this part on Appa. But he also reads at the very bottom, whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. This deck is not built to take a lot of advantage out of having these tokens, whether that be like traditional token strategies like swinging for a bunch of damage going wide and then whatever. This deck mostly pivots to using those allies for value by sacrificing them. So the Skull Clamp is really good. Tataru Taru is an interesting one. So when Tataru Taru enters, you draw a card and target opponent may draw a card. And then whenever an opponent draws a card, if it isn't that player's turn, create a tapped treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. I love this card in CEDH. Tataru is a very good card in that format because oftentimes people have draw engines where they're drawing cards on other people's turns. It's not as good in casual, but I think any sort of ramp in this deck is going to be really strong for us. And it also has the ability of it, when it enters, you can draw a card. So it allows you to get a little bit of value there. It immediately replaces itself when it enters. And then if your opponent chooses to draw the card, then you get the tapped treasure. But notably, you can use this as a political piece to say, okay, when Tataru Taru's in exile, you can essentially sit there and say, okay, I can play this whenever I want. Does someone need a card? You can offer people things in exchange for allowing them to draw a card, and then they'll conveniently forget the fact that you're getting a tapped treasure and you're also getting an extra card. Our next category is fun. So I wanted to name this category jank, but there's not enough jank in this deck, and it's mostly just fun things. So the first card I will bring to your attention is a Wedding Ring. This is 2 colorless and 2 white for an artifact, and when Wedding Ring enters the battlefield, if it was cast, target opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring gains life during their turn, you gain that much life. So this is a draw piece that allows you to just kind of piggyback off of typically one opponent, but it also benefits that opponent. This card isn't crazy good in this deck. I find Wedding Ring is a decent card when you're playing it fairly in white, just because you can find the guy at the table who's going to be drawing the most cards and piggyback off of them and get some extra card draw. But I quite like the idea of flickering this Wedding Ring and making multiple copies of it, and then because essentially every time the Wedding Ring enters, one of your opponents makes a copy of it. So if you flicker this a few times, you can essentially get married to the whole table. So anytime anybody draws a card, everybody draws a card, and I think that's pretty funny. Static Snare. So this is not crazy. This is one of the cards that I would probably most likely cut out of this category, but it is 4 generic and a white for an enchantment with flash, and it costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature. When this enchantment enters, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So Static Snare is an interesting piece. It's akin to Ghostly Prison in this deck. So if you play this for cheap, when someone attacks whenever, because these attacking creatures could be one opponent attacking another opponent. So you can play this initially for a little discount, maybe hit a creature that you don't want on the table, and then airbend it away later. And so this Static Snare will sit in exile and only costs 2 generic. So essentially, if an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, this Static Snare is free. So your opponents will see this Static Snare. Your opponents will see this card sitting in exile and realize that as soon as they attack you and give you a discount on it, you can play it for free and then exile one of their creatures. Now, this doesn't get rid of everything. This doesn't get rid of anything forever. This is only until the Static Snare leaves the battlefield. But typically those creatures, if you're exiling them while they're attacking, you typically don't have to worry about them when they're not attacking. So this is nice to just kind of hold up. And I mean, I think half the value of this card is going to be when it's sitting in exile and you can just threaten the activation of it. So it'll act like a Ghostly Prison that hopefully you can get a discount on early when you cast it with that mana reduction. Silver Quill Lecturer. This is a really interesting one, I think, in the deck. I have yet to come across it when playtesting, so I don't know if it's actually good or not. I don't believe anyone on any of the EDH rec decks is playing this, but this is 4 generic and a white for a 3/3 core wizard, and creature spells you cast have Demonstrate, which is whenever you cast a creature spell, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. Each copy becomes a token. This just allows you to get generically more value out of your small creatures that draw you cards or do other things. And there's plenty of removal pieces in here that are creatures that when they enter, destroy something. So you can give an extra one to your opponent in exchange for them not hitting one of your things with it. So this allows you to get a lot more value out of other things that you're flickering. Now here is the heater. This is my favorite card in the deck. It is Knowledge Pool. This is a 6-mana artifact with imprint. When Knowledge Pool enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top 3 cards of his or her library. Whenever a player casts a spell from his or her hand, that player exiles it. If the player does, he or she may cast another non-land card exiled with Knowledge Pool without paying that card's mana cost. So Knowledge Pool, effectively when it enters, you get to see 12 cards. 3 of your own and 9 from your opponent's. And then anything you cast from your hand gives you access to any of those 12 cards. So you can obviously cast a 1-mana spell and then get something massive from your opponents. That's cool at face value. But the problem is, if this is in your deck, typically that means you have expensive stuff that you want to take advantage of it with. And so your opponents have the ability to steal that then, right? So what ends up happening is this Knowledge Pool fills up with cards that aren't good at the time. And then nobody wants to do anything with it, so it just kind of sits there. But with Appa, you can cast this Knowledge Pool, get all the value out of it, and then airbend it away. You can, flicker your Appa or do whatever to get this Knowledge Pool exiled so that no longer does anybody else have access to the cards. Then on your turn, when you untap, you can pay 2 to recast this Knowledge Pool. 2 mana for this. 2 mana, draw 12, effectively. And so you can get all the benefits out of this Knowledge Pool and then just airbend it away so nobody else gets access to it, which I think is cool. And also, when it re-enters, while you will not have access to the 12 cards exiled previously, it'll get you a fresh set of cards. So this will really start churning through your deck if you flicker this. And I don't know if you're watching the video, you will already have seen that I have some fairly expensive creatures in here in a certain category that would be really cool to sneak into play with this Knowledge Pool. Worthy of note, you only get to steal things from this Knowledge Pool when you cast a spell from your hand. So if you have spells that are airbended that are in exile, you can cast those and they will not trigger this Knowledge Pool. So you can still do your own things and cast your own airbended things without the downside of having them get exiled under this Knowledge Pool. Big fan of this card. I think this card is a slam dunk in this deck. And it's cheap too, $2. Love that. Next, we have a removal suite. It's fairly small. This could definitely use some reworking. Quite a bit of the sideboard is dedicated to removal. So I'm just I plan on changing out some of the removal when this deck sees more play. There's some interesting ones. This is probably the most important one. This is Active Authority. 1 generic and 2 white for an enchantment. And when Active Authority enters the battlefield, you may exile target artifact or enchantment. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile target artifact or enchantment. If you do, its controller gains control of Active Authority. So this card is a, power crept version of a card called Banishing Light. Banishing Light is essentially 3 mana enchantment. When it enters, exile something until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. This, you'll notice, obviously it only hits artifacts and enchantments, which is not as good as Banishing Light. But it exiles these cards until it exiles them forever. So if Active Authority leaves the battlefield, these cards are just gone. So this allows you to have permanent based removal in white that you can flicker to keep hitting things. Now, obviously, this doesn't, like I said, doesn't hit creatures, but there's plenty of other things in this deck that do that. I think the only other one worthy of note here is On Thin Ice. So this is 1 mana for a snow enchantment aura and reads, enchant snow land you control. When On Thin Ice enters the battlefield, exile target creature and opponent controls until On Thin Ice leaves the battlefield. It's a 1 mana Banishing Light that we can flicker to hit other extra things. If the thing that we hit initially with it doesn't become a problem and then something else is a bigger problem, we can flicker this to do that. And we're running Snowlands in this deck, obviously, because of the Arkham's Astrolabe. So this is just really good permanent-based removal. Let's see, we talked about reduction. So now we'll talk about our ramp package. So because we're playing some heavy hitters in this deck, we have 15 pieces of ramp, which is a little bit much in addition to the 8 pieces of mana reduction we have. This deck I'm definitely going to play around with. This is the first time I've ever built a deck in mono white that is anything similar to this. So this will surely need some work. So we've got some notable ones are Ashnod's Altar. So this is a 3-mana artifact that reads sacrifice a creature to add 2 colorless. This effectively acts as a mana reducer with our infinite combo. So because our infinite combo requires us to cast a spell from exile, that will trigger Appa, which will allow us to create a 1/1 creature. So that creature token we can then sacrifice to add colorless, which if we don't have any other reducers is enough to recast the other thing. So this essentially acts as a 2 colorless mana reducer for all of our spells we cast from exile, which is nice. Bender's Waterskin is in this deck. It is 3 mana for an artifact that reads untap this artifact during each other player's untap step and tap to add 1 mana of any color. I don't know how well this deck or how effectively this deck is going to be able to play at flash speed. So remains to be seen if this card is going to stick around or not. I have a good feeling about this card, and it's also, you know, a nice thematic choice, but we will see. Charitable Levy. So this is a card that I don't think sees nearly enough play, and I'm not really sure why. So this is 1 colorless and a white for an enchantment that reads non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. So it does hit your own spells, which, you know, not great. But whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, put a collection counter on Charitable Levy. Then if there are 3 or more collection counters on it, sacrifice it. If you do, draw a card, then you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So effectively, because this deck runs so few non-creature spells, at least in the early game, this Charitable Levy will effectively never hit you. It will only make your opponent's things cost more. And when you're playing mono white, it is very important to slow your opponents down in the early game so that you can out late game them. This Charitable Levy does exactly that. It comes down turn 2, slows all your opponents down. If you're the first person on turn 2, typically these people will be trying to play 2 mana rocks turn 2, and this will slow them way down. And then obviously your opponents will run all their non-creature spells into this, and eventually you'll get to play a tapped plains for free and draw a card, so it replaces itself. It's an uncommon for Modern Horizons 3, so it's pretty accessible. You'll probably be able to find it in a bulk bin at your local game store. So I would pick up a few copies of Charitable Levy. It's a good card, not just in this deck. We've got all of the white creatures that allow you to find basic plains when your opponents have more lands than you. Coveted Jewel is a great card in this deck. It is 6 mana for an artifact. When Coveted Jewel enters, draw 3 cards, and you can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color. Whenever 1 or more creatures an opponent controls attack you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards and gains control of Coveted Jewel. Untap it. So Coveted Jewel is really good. 6 mana, draw 3 is not terrible. And being able to immediately tap it to get 3 mana of any one color is pretty good, because then effectively, if you have something to play with that 3 mana, you're paying 3 mana to draw 3, which is pretty okay. The downside is obviously if your opponents hit you with their creatures, you do lose this Coveted Jewel, but just like the Knowledge Pool, you can mitigate that downside by airbending this Coveted Jewel away when you don't need it. And then obviously flickering it draws you a bunch of cards, and it is a solid mana rock to boot. Let's see. Extraplanar Lens is a fun one. This is pretty well known in monocolored decks. But this is a 3 mana artifact with imprint. Whenever Extraplanar Lens enters the battlefield, you may exile target land you control. So you have to exile a land from the battlefield, not from your hand like imprint normally is. And whenever a land with the same name as the exile card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. So essentially, you'll exile a plains with this, and then all of your plains is now tapped for double. If this come down turn 4, turn 5, yeah, you might have a non-plains land or something like that typically in this deck, but this will be at least mana neutral by the time you actually want to play it. And getting extra colored mana is always good, especially in mono white. Now this card, Solemn Simulacrum. Look, If you watched the last episode on YouTube or Spotify, you would have seen me defacing a Solemn Simulacrum on camera. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to do it to another one right now because I hate this card so much. I keep a box of them just in case I ever want to tear one apart, like today. But all you haters who like Solemn Simulacrum and think that I don't know what I'm talking about, I get it. It's a very popular card. But I hate it. I think it's way overcosted for what it does, and I think it is way overplayed. That being said, I want you all to know that I try. I try to make this card work. I really, really try to make this card work. And this card isn't, and it's not awful. It's just that in most of the decks that I build, if I have 4 mana laying around to do something, and I spend it on a Solemn Simulacrum, I'm probably already losing the game. That's just how it is. There's so many other things that I would rather do with 4 mana than get a tapped basic and maybe draw a card. Sorry, not sorry. This card made it into the final 100 cards of this deck because I really want to try and make this card work. And I really want to be, I don't want to be a hater. I'm a lover. I don't like hating, but I hate this card. It's going to stay in the 99 until I get sick of it, I suppose. I don't know. I'm trying, guys. I really am trying. I think that's all the worthy notable includes. Sorry about that rant, everybody. I don't know what happened. Our small protection suite that will most likely grow consists of Aven Interrupter, which is a card that I will probably never cut from this deck. It is 1 generic and 2 blue for a 2/2 bird rogue with flash and flying. When Aven Interrupter enters the battlefield, exile target spell, it becomes plotted, which means its owner may cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. And also reads, spells your opponents cast from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. So this is effectively, I don't want to say it's a counter spell, but it's as close as you can really get on a creature in white. But it's really nice because it has flash. This works very similarly to this static snare that we talked about earlier, where you can pretty much have a gotcha moment with somebody once, and then later on you can exile, or you can airbend away this Aven Interrupter and let it just sit there in exile threateningly. Your opponents will love you so much. The next card is Set Tiger. This one might get cut, I'm not sure. It's 2 generic and 2 white for a 3/3 cat creature with flash. And when Set's Tiger comes into play, you gain protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Again, same thing with Static Snare. This just sits in exile and warns your opponents, if you hit me, you can go ahead and swing your super big commander my way. I will just instant speed gain protection from it. Here it is. This category is called Big Money. So these are 8 ELDRAZIs that all have cast triggers and do amazing things. These are the closers. If you have a legitimate turn 0 conversation with your table and you explain to them that your deck wins with these combo pieces, they will see it coming from a mile away and they will nuke them as soon as they hit the table. That's fine. You can sit there and flicker your small draw creatures until you find one of these suckers. And this is why the ramp package is so robust. Because the mana cost of these cards are 6, 6, 13, 10, 10, 10, 6, and 10. These are very expensive creatures. But you can flicker these because you can get cast triggers with this. So these are just, I'll just kind of breeze through these. Anti-Causal Vestige is a new one from Edge of Eternities that allows you to with Warp that when it leaves the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you can put a permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. I think it's got to be less than 4. Conduit of Ruin is a 6-mana ELDRAZI that lets you tutor for ELDRAZI, and the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less, which is nice, so it discounts your other ELDRAZIs. Embercool, the Promised End, costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard, so this automatically reduces its own cost. Super pertinent with the airbending thing. And whenever you cast it, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. And Flying Trample protection from instants. So this steals your opponent. You get to essentially run one of your opponents into the ground whenever you cast this. Flare of Loyalty, when you cast it, you steal an opponent's creature until end of turn. It becomes a 10/10, gains Trample, Annihilator 2, and Haste. Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, or Kozilek. God, I'm butchering these names. Butcher of Truth. Kozilek, when you cast him, draw 4 cards. He's got Annihilator 4 and want to put into a graveyard from anywhere. It's one of the Shuffle Titans. It lets you shuffle your graveyard into your library. So this is an anti-mill card. Kozilek, the Rate Distortion. Whenever you cast a spell, if you have fewer than 7 cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So this card draws you up to 7. And this allows you to discard a card with mana value X to counter target spell with mana value X. So this allows you to sit there with a full grip of cards and counter your opponent's things just by discarding cards, which is cool. Oblivion Sower. Whenever you cast it, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So this allows you to steal your opponent's lands. Effectively, if you have any sort of loop going, you can steal all of your opponent's lands and they enter untapped. So if you can flicker Oblivion Sower infinite times or just a bunch of times, you can probably win the game from there, just off of the back of that one card. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, reads whenever you cast a spell, exile 2 target permanents. So, yeah, if you can flicker Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, a bunch of times, your opponents just don't have anything left on their battlefields. And then you can win with a 10/10. So yeah, ELDRAZI. Mono white ELDRAZI, very fun. We'll take a quick look at our land package. It's nothing too crazy. We've got Ally Encampment, which is nice. It allows you to pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it to return an ally you control to its owner's hand. So just if someone, saving Appa is not going to be a big thing because recasting Appa will still airbend your board. So it's never a terrible thing to just recast Appa. But being able to protect him from things that keep him on the battlefield and prevent you from recasting him or flickering him, Ally Encampment is a good protection piece. Now we'll talk about these deserts. So Arid Archway is one of them. It's a desert. I'm gonna have to go through these again. Sheffet Dunes is another one, which is a desert. Let's see. Survivor's Encampment is a desert as well. So there's 3 deserts in this deck so that we can run this card called Sand Scout in a ramp package. Essentially, Sand Scout is like the other 2-mana creatures that find us lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped, but Sand Scout only finds us deserts. So not a crazy good card, but it is nice to have an extra copy of these cards that help us find lands for only 2. Basically, we like to have a turn 2 play. So having one of these cards that lets us find a land and put it on the battlefield is sweet. And so having a few deserts in the land base to round that out is nice. We've got Igonjo, Sea of the Empire for some removal in the land suite. ELDRAZI Temple is shockingly cheap. It's a land that enters untapped. You can tap it to add a colorless and tap it to add 2 colorless to only cast ELDRAZI spells or activate abilities of colorless ELDRAZI. So this comes down untapped, lets you cast normal things with its first ability, and then later when you want to cast your big ELDRAZI, this allows you to tap for 2. Emergent Zone allows you to sacrifice it and cast spells this turn as though they had flash, which is nice, so you can get tricky with things. Eye of Ugin might take me a little while to get because it's a $70 land, but it's a legendary land that reads, colorless ELDRAZI spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and you can pay 7 and tap it and search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So this is a ELDRAZI Reducer and an ELDRAZI Tutor, which is pretty cool. Fountain Port is interesting. Really, the only notable ability here is you can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice a token to draw a card. So this just gives you some extra value with those allies you're going to be creating with Appa. Now, this is an interesting piece of tech that I've decided to include here, and I don't know how it's going to pay off, but this is Horizon of Progress. The only thing notable about this land is that you can pay 3 and tap it to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Now, that ability rivals that of this card called Terrain Generator, which allows you to pay 2 and tap it and put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So these cards are really good, I think. I always have loved Terrain Generator. Horizon of Progress, I like it a little bit less, obviously, because it costs more to activate. But in mono white, where you might not have things to do later on in the game, they're super great. They help you power out your Eldrazi a turn or two earlier. And we are running World Map and Expedition Map, which are 2 colorless artifact, non-basic land tutors. So these allow you to find either of these lands, which are great. So it effectively gets you 4 copies of Terrain Generator or Horizon of Progress. So it lets you, when you search for these lands with your cards like Archaeomancer's Map, these lands allow you to take those extra lands that are sitting around in your hand and throw them onto the battlefield, effectively giving you extra land drops, which is nice. Let's see. Karoo is interesting. This sort of works with the Horizon of Progress Terrain Generator plan, where this allows you to. It's a mono white bounce land essentially. So it comes into play tapped, and when it comes into play, return an untapped planes you control to its owner's hand or bury Karoo, sorry, and tap it to add a white or 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. So this is a really bad land. This will I'll probably put it in the deck, play it a few times, and then cut it. But I think it's a cute little land. The art is really cute. There's some, what are these? They're not elk. I know what elk are. Antelope, little antelope fighting. There's a tree. It's pretty, and it bounces the land to your hand that you can put out later. Minas Tirith enters untapped if you control a legendary creature, taps for a white, and then you can pay a colorless and a white, tap it and draw a card, but only if you've attacked with 2 more creatures this turn. We have some pretty solid evasion. A lot of these creatures just incidentally have flying, so you'll often be able to peck at people and draw cards with this. Monumental Hand is just a little bit of card advantage on a land if you have extra mana hanging around. Sanctum of Ugin. This is a land that taps for a colorless, and when you cast a colorless spell with a converted mana cost 7 or greater, I can sacrifice it, and if I do, search my library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, put it in my hand, and then shuffle my library. So effectively, whenever I cast 1 Eldrazi, if I have Sanctum of Ugin out, I can, notably it's a May ability, so I may sacrifice it and go get another Eldrazi, which is nice. We already talked about Shepherd Dunes. Shrine of the Forgotten Gods. This allows me to effectively cast Eldrazi spells later. If I have 7 or more lands, this taps for 2 colorless, which is nice, but only for colorless spells. We've got our Snow-Covered Plains for our On Thin Ice and Arkham's Astrolabe. Survivor's Encampment, which allows us to... Oh, that's just a desert. We already talked about that. Ugin's Labyrinth. This is a fun one. When Ugin's Labyrinth enters the battlefield, you may exile a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. This taps for a colorless, and if a card is exiled with Ugin's Labyrinth, add 2 colorless instead. And you can also tap it to return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So this allows you to essentially say, okay, I have an Eldrazi Titan in my hand turn 1, and I'm going to get rid of it and allow this to become an Ancient Tomb instead. And then whenever you actually want to start casting that, you can just instant speed, return it to your hand on someone's end step, and then cast that Eldrazi later. Let's see. I am not even going to attempt, I will attempt to pronounce this. Untidake, the Cloud Keeper. It is a legendary land. It comes into play tapped and allows you to tap it and pay 2 life and add 2 colorless to your mana pool and only to play legendary spells. So again, this is another land that's not great, but lets you cast your legendary Eldrazi Titans a turn earlier, which I think is cool. War Room, just extra value in the extra card draw in your mana base. And then Winding Canyons is, I think, an underplayed card. But it is rather expensive because it's from Weatherlight and it hasn't been reprinted to my knowledge since. But it comes in untapped and you can pay 2 and tap it until end of turn. You may play creature cards whenever you could play instants. So this gives all of your creature cards flash effectively. Let me see. Is there Oracle text? You may cast creature spells this turn as though they had flash. So it doesn't give your creatures flash, but it allows you to cast them at flash speed, which is nice. And it's repeatable, unlike some of the other things, like this Emergent Zone is not a repeatable ability. You have to sacrifice it. So with that, that is a quick rundown of the deck. There's nothing too notable in the sideboard that I have. The sideboard that I have is fairly... Ooh, maybe there is a little bit. Let me introduce you to this card called Omen Machine. This card is not in the deck because it's a very heavy stacks piece, and one of our TikTok videos blew up, and everyone was taking a dump on me because they thought we liked playing stacks pieces and we're not fun players. But what do we know? This is 6 mana for an artifact that reads, players can't draw cards. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. If it's a land card, that player puts it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, the player casts it without paying its mana cost if able. I mean, it's just, the more I think about this card, the more it is just a stacks piece. And this deck allows us to break parity on stacks pieces. And I tried to build this deck not stacks heavy, but that's why it's in the sideboard, not in the main board. Mirror of Life Trapping. This is a really interesting one. And I don't think it's quite good enough for the deck, but I might grab a copy of it and test it out. So this is a 4-mana artifact that reads, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it was cast, exile it, then return all other permanent cards exiled with Mirror of Life Trapping to the battlefield under their owner's control. So, this is both a stacks piece, kind of screwing up our opponent's game plan and forcing them to play around it, while also doubling up a bunch of our triggers. So this is an enters the battlefield trigger. So any of our creatures that have cast triggers or enters the battlefield triggers, we will get, period, because you get the cast trigger first, and then you get the enter the battlefield trigger after. So now if you cast it, that creature will get exiled, and then if there's anything exiled under the mirror, that goes onto the battlefield. So casting anything, any creature triggers this, and then if anything underneath it has an enter the battlefield ability, you get that enter the battlefield ability. So this doubles your ETB abilities, like not unlike Panharmonicon, which I've never been a fan of, but I think this is okay in this deck. But this also forces our opponents to play around it, so they won't get doubled any cast triggers, and we can't double our cast triggers, but we still get cast triggers off of our creatures. But it does allow us to double up our ETBs while also messing with our opponents. But I haven't found a place that it fits in the deck, and it doesn't seem good enough to me anymore, but it may be worth it. I don't quite see it quite yet. With that, I think that's all that I want to talk about. There's definitely some interesting includes, I think, and this deck needs a lot of work. There will be some playtesting involved, but I have every plan to build this deck in paper because I need a home for ELDRAZI, and I don't currently play much ELDRAZI, and I want to do more. And I think if I'm gonna consider myself a janky player and I'm gonna play ELDRAZI, it's got to be mono white. That's got to be where it is. I think that's all I have to talk about. So with that, I think that's all I have to talk about this deck. I mean, if you have any thoughts, this deck is up on our Architect currently. I'm actually messing with it on Architect right now on our account. So if you have any thoughts, throw those in the comments. If there's some includes that I missed, which I'm sure there are, throw them in the comments. If you hate Solemn Simulacrum, throw it in the comments. If you love Solemn Simulacrum, throw it in the comments.
And tell me where you live. I'll come to your house.
And I'll tear up
every copy of Solemn Simulacrum you own. I'll do it. I will.
Don't play that
shitty ass card.
Stop playing Solemn Simulacrum!
Stop it. Stop playing that card.
It's boring. You don't want to be boring. You want to be cool. Anyway. Thank you so much for watching episode 6 of Swords to Podcast. If you want more episodes like this, or if you want more episodes of just Thomas doing deck techs, let us know. Really, any feedback you have for us, throw it in the comments. Let us know. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next week, and hopefully, I'll see you in Atlanta. Later.